17 doctors failed to save the millionaire's son, until a poor girl noticed something. The boy was believed to have his days numbered, and no one knew why. As the doctors gave up, a simple girl silently entered the room. Minutes later, she pulled something alive from his throat. That's when the real nightmare began. The smell of disinfectant never completely washes out of the clothes. No matter how hard Joanna scrubbed, no matter how much cheap fabric softener she bought on sale at the corner bodega, the odor lingered. It was as if Queen's General Hospital had seeped into the very fibers of everything she touched, into her calloused hands, into her hair, pulled back in a tight bun, into her daughter's worn-out backpack. Mariana was 9 years old and knew every hallway of that 7-story building better than she knew the streets of her own neighborhood. Ever since things got hard, ever since everything changed, she spent her afternoons there, sitting in some quiet corner, doing homework in a crumpled notebook, or watching the flurry of doctors, nurses, patients, and visitors. She was such a constant, silent presence that most people didn't even notice her anymore. The scrawny little girl with undone braids, a stained school uniform, and eyes far too big for her small face. Joanna preferred it that way. She preferred her daughter to be invisible, to not bother anyone, to not give anyone a reason to complain. The job was all she had left after Michael was gone. 6 months had passed since that terrible day, and yet it still felt like yesterday. The pain didn't lessen, it just changed shape. Before, it was sharp, cutting, unbearable. Now it was a constant companion, a weight on her chest that never let her take a full breath. Michael was a maintenance tech. He took care of hospitals, clinics, community health centers, always with his toolbox slung over his shoulder and an easy smile on his face. But in the last few months before he was gone, he changed. He started complaining of fatigue, of a strange feeling in his throat, like something was stuck there. He coughed a lot. He'd get winded just climbing stairs. His skin lost its healthy tone, turning pale, almost grayish. Joanna took him to the ER 3 times. Each time they said it was stress, that it was acid reflux, that it was anxiety. They gave him generic prescriptions and sent him home. The 4th time, when Michael could barely speak, when his eyes had that strange, distant glint of someone who's already too far away, they finally admitted him. But it was too late. Far too late. Mariana remembered every detail. She remembered her dad, lying in that white bed, struggling to breathe, trying to smile at her even when it was impossible. She remembered how he squeezed her hand as if he wanted to say something important, but couldn't. And she remembered that night, the last one, when she woke up startled on the waiting room couch and ran to his room. Her father was agitated, his eyes wide, his mouth open, gasping for air. And then she saw it, or thought she saw it, something dark, moist, moving in his throat. She screamed. She called for the nurses, but by the time they arrived, there was nothing left to do. They said it was respiratory complications. They said these things happen sometimes. They said it was better for her to forget what she'd seen, that it was just her grief playing tricks on her, that a child can't really understand these situations. Joanna didn't really believe them either. She was too tired to argue, too sad to fight. She accepted the death certificate, accepted the mechanical condolences, accepted the silence that followed. But Mariana didn't forget. She couldn't. Her dad's stethoscope was tucked away in her backpack, along with her notebooks and a small case of colored pencils with only 6 colors left. It was an old thing. The earpieces cracked and the diaphragm scratched, but she carried it as if it were the most precious thing in the world. Sometimes, when no one was looking, she'd put it in her ears and press it against her own chest, listening to her heartbeat. It was her way of feeling like her dad was still there somehow. It was on a Thursday afternoon, when the October heat made the air heavy and suffocating, even inside the air-conditioned hospital, that everything began to change. Mariana was sitting in the 4th-floor hallway near the pediatric ICU, trying to solve a math problem that made no sense to her. Numbers were always a mystery. She preferred words, stories, things that had feeling, but her teacher insisted math was important, so she tried. The activity in the hallway picked up, rushed doctors, nurses with tense expressions. equipment carts being pushed with urgency. Someone was speaking in a low voice about a critical patient, a boy of just 10, the son of important people. The last name was mentioned with reverence. Adler, the Adler family, owners of one of the state's largest pharmacy chains. Mariana didn't care about important last names, but she felt something strange when a nurse hurried past and let a few stray words slip. Unexplained symptoms, low oxygen saturation, no conclusive diagnosis. That sparked something inside her, an uneasy, familiar, terrifying feeling. In the following days, the commotion only grew. Mariana started paying attention. She overheard fragmented conversations as doctors walked down the hall. They talked about normal test results, of protocols followed to the letter, of theories that couldn't be confirmed. The boy was getting worse, but no one understood why. It was as if his body was simply deciding to shut down for no apparent reason. Joanna noticed her daughter was different, more alert, more restless. She tried to strike up a conversation a few times, but Mariana would change the subject. How could she explain to her mom that the words the doctors were saying, the symptoms they were describing, were the exact same ones her dad had? How could she say that the smell coming from inside the ICU, even with the doors closed and the air filtered, was the same smell she remembered from the room where Michael spent his last days? It was a smell that shouldn't have been there, rust mixed with damp earth. Something organic, almost alive, masked by the hospital disinfectant, but perceptible to anyone who knew what to look for. Mariana knew. She had seared that smell into her memory like a trauma. She tried to speak up. One morning, when one of the younger nurses stopped to get a drink of water near where she was sitting, Mariana worked up the courage. "Ma'am, can I ask you a question about the boy in the ICU?" The nurse, a woman in her 30s with deep dark circles under her eyes, looked at her, surprised. "How do you know about the boy?" "I hear people talking. I kind of live here. I mean, my mom works here." "Oh, right. You're Joanna's daughter. But you shouldn't be listening to these things. It's a medical case. It's confidential." "I know, but his symptoms sound like my dad's, before he passed away." The nurse sighed, clearly out of patience. "Honey, every case is different. Just because your dad got sick doesn't make you a doctor, okay? Now let me get back to work." Mariana felt her face flush. It wasn't exactly anger. It was frustration. It was desperation. It was the feeling of having something important to say and not being able to make anyone listen. She tried again with a resident who always took his breaks on a nearby bench. He was kinder, but just as dismissive. He said he understood her pain, that it was normal to make emotional connections after a loss, but that she couldn't torture herself with comparisons. He suggested she talk to a therapist. No one believed her. And the more she insisted, the more they seemed to treat her like a nuisance, a traumatized child trying to process her grief in an unhealthy way. That's when she decided she had to see for herself. She needed to be sure before she tried to convince another adult, because if she was wrong, she'd just be another confused kid. But if she was right and nobody listened, that boy would go down the same path as her father, and she couldn't let that happen. It was late afternoon when she found her chance. The shift change was happening, that chaotic moment when one team leaves and another arrives, when information is passed along, and attention is divided. The ICU door was left ajar when a tech came out carrying equipment. Mariana waited. She counted to 10, and she slipped inside. The place was colder than she'd imagined. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. There were 3 beds, but only one was occupied. The boy, Gabriel Adler. She read the name on the chart at the foot of the bed. He was lying there, hooked up to several machines that beeped rhythmically. His skin had that same pale, almost grayish tone. His eyes were closed, but he was breathing with a visible effort, his chest rising and falling irregularly. Mariana felt her heart pound. It was exactly like her dad. Exactly. She approached slowly, barely breathing. She took the stethoscope out of her backpack. Her hands trembled as she placed the earpieces in her ears. She pressed the diaphragm to the boy's chest, listening to the rapid, irregular heartbeat. Then she moved it to his neck, and then, close to his throat. The sound made her pull back. It was wet, viscous, like something was moving in there, something that shouldn't be, an organic pulsating sound that didn't match any natural noise of the human body. The same sound she'd heard on that terrible night when her father was still trying to fight. The tears came without warning. They weren't tears of sadness, but of confirmation. She wasn't crazy. She hadn't made it up. There was something there, something the doctors couldn't see on the scans, something that was killing Gabriel the same way it had killed Michael. "Mariana, what are you doing in here?" The voice cut through the silence like a knife. She spun around, terrified. It was Dr. Henry Sampson, the head of the medical team, a tall man with graying hair and a perpetually serious expression. Beside him, 2 nurses stared in shock. I just wanted to help," she whispered. "Help? You're a child. You are not authorized to be in here. This is an extremely serious violation. But I know what's wrong with him. I know because my dad had the same thing." Dr. Sampson clenched his fists, clearly reining in his anger. "Your mother is going to hear about this, and if you ever stick your nose where it doesn't belong again, she will lose her job. Do you understand?" Her world seemed to crumble. Mariana ran out, tears blurring her vision, the stethoscope still hanging around her neck. She rushed past Joanna in the hallway, who called out to her in alarm, but she didn't stop. She ran down the stairs, through the crowded lobby, out the main entrance, and only slowed down when she reached the small side garden of the hospital, where she finally collapsed onto a wooden bench. She sobbed, not just because of the scolding, not just because of the threat to her mum's job, but because of the helplessness. She knew, she was sure of it, but no one would believe her. And Gabriel was dying. It was there in that forgotten garden, with the sun setting and painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, that Mariana made a decision. If the adults weren't going to listen to her, she would have to find another way. She would need proof, she would need someone who believed her, and she wouldn't give up until she found them. Because if there was one thing Michael had taught his daughter before he was gone, it was that the truth is always worth fighting for, even when the whole world tells you you're wrong. And Mariana was just getting started. The conversation with her mother was worse than Mariana had imagined. Joanna didn't yell, and in a way that made it harder. She just sat on the edge of the bed they shared in their small one-bedroom apartment, looked at her daughter with those tired eyes that seemed to have aged 10 years in 6 months, and spoke in a low, almost defeated tone. "Mari, honey, I get it. I get that you miss your dad. I miss him too. Every single day. But you can't do this. You can't go into restricted areas. You can't get involved in medical cases. These people studied for years to do what they do, and I need this job, do you understand? I need it." Joanna's voice broke on the last sentence. Mariana watched her mother run her hands over her face, trying to hold back the tears that always threatened to fall but rarely did. Joanna was the type to keep everything bottled up, to never let herself break. "Someone has to be strong," she always said. "I'm sorry, Mom. I won't do it again." It was a lie. Mariana knew it was a lie, even as she said it. But she couldn't worry her mother any more than she already did. She couldn't be another burden. That night, lying in the dark, staring at the water-stained ceiling, Mariana devised a plan. If the doctors wouldn't believe her because she was a kid, if she had no credibility or authority, then she would need evidence. She would need to prove she wasn't making it up, that it wasn't trauma or her imagination. And for that, she needed to study. In the following days, whenever she had a free moment at the hospital, Mariana started digging. Not in forbidden places, not anymore, but in forgotten ones. The second-floor medical library, which almost no one used since everything went digital. The dusty shelves held old books on rare diseases, parasites, medical conditions that seemed straight out of a horror movie. She flipped through those heavy volumes with a quiet determination. She didn't understand half the terms, but she wrote everything down in a notebook. She drew the parasites she saw illustrated. She read about symptoms, about modes of transmission, about signs that doctors should look for but often overlooked. That's how she found it. On a hot November afternoon, with the ceiling fan spinning lazily and casting shadows on the yellowed pages of a book published in 1983, The chapter was titled Pulmonary and Upper Airway Parasites of Tropical Regions. There was an illustration that made Mariana's heart stop. It was exactly what she had seen, or thought she had seen, dark, segmented, with tiny appendages. The text explained that they were rare organisms, found mainly in humid forest areas, that lodged in the host's respiratory tract and slowly fed on the tissue. The problem was they didn't show up on common tests. X-rays only showed inflammation. Blood tests were inconclusive, and by the time they were finally discovered, it was often too late. Michael had worked maintenance at rural health clinics. He had gone to upstate New York several times, to small towns surrounded by woods. It made sense. It made perfect sense. But Gabriel? The rich kid who had probably never set foot in a rural area in his life. How would he have been infected? That was the question that wouldn't go away. And it was in searching for the answer that Mariana began to notice something strange. In the hospital corridors, between conversations she overheard, she started to see a pattern. A few people mentioned a man who visited Gabriel. He wasn't family, he wasn't a doctor. He wore a visitor's badge, but no one knew exactly who he was. Some nurses thought he was a distant uncle, others a family friend. But no one was sure. Mariana started paying attention. She began to note the times. She realized the man always showed up in the same window, between 2 and 3 in the afternoon, when the foot traffic was lighter and the staff was more spread out. He would stay for just a few minutes and then leave. Discreet, almost invisible. It was on one of those days that she finally saw him. She was sitting in the 4th-floor hallway, pretending to read a book when he walked by. He was a middle-aged man, thin, wearing sunglasses even inside the hospital. There was something about his demeanor that was unsettling, a tension in his shoulders, a quick glance to either side before entering the ICU. Mariana waited for him to leave. When he passed her, she smelled it again. Rust and earth, faint but there. Her heart raced. She followed him, discreetly, keeping her distance, blending in with the hospital's flow. She saw him stop at the ground-floor restroom, stay for a few minutes, and then leave. Then he headed straight for the exit. Mariana knew she couldn't follow him outside. Joanna would find out, someone would see her, everything would get worse. But she needed something, some proof, some connection. That's when she got the idea. She ran back to the 4th floor. She went into the restroom he had used. There was a regular trash can with used paper towels, but at the bottom, almost hidden, was a small empty glass vial. She picked it up carefully, wrapped it in a paper towel and tucked it into her backpack. She didn't know what it was. She didn't know if it meant anything, but it was something. The days passed, and Gabriel got worse. Mariana heard the increasingly desperate conversations of the doctors. They talked about transferring him to a bigger hospital in Manhattan, to international specialists. The family was mobilizing immense resources, but nothing was working. The boy was wasting away before everyone's eyes, and medicine seemed powerless. It was on one of those tense afternoons that Mariana crossed paths with someone different. He was a new doctor, no more than in his late 20s, probably fresh out of med school. He was sitting in the same medical library where she often spent her time, flipping through books with a frustrated expression. She recognized him from the hallway conversations. Dr. Rafael Ortiz, the youngest on the team, the one who always asked questions that made the other doctors uncomfortable. He looked up at her, surprised to see a child in that place. "You like reading about medicine?" Mariana hesitated, but there was something in his tone that was different. It wasn't condescending. It was genuinely curious. "I'm trying to understand something." "Understand what?" She took a deep breath. It was a risk, but she was running out of time. Gabriel was running out of time. "About the boy in the ICU, Gabriel." Raphael frowned. "You shouldn't know about patient cases." "I know. But I think I know what he has, and I don't think the tests will show it." The doctor looked at her with renewed attention. He didn't laugh. He didn't dismiss her. He just asked calmly, "Why do you think that?" "My dad had the same symptoms before he passed away, and nobody figured out what it was until it was too late." There was a silence. Raphael stroked his sparse beard, thoughtful. And what do you think it is? Mariana opened the notebook where she had taken notes. She showed him the drawings, the descriptions, the pages she had photographed with her mom's old phone. Raphael took the notebook, glanced through the pages, and something in his expression shifted. Airway parasites. We didn't even consider that. It's extremely rare, but possible. Possible, yes. But how would a kid from an urban family be exposed to something like that? Mariana took a deep breath. I think someone gave it to him on purpose. The words came out heavier than she expected. Raphael stared at her, incredulous. That's a very serious accusation. Do you have any evidence? She showed him the vial she had found. A man visits Gabriel every day. Nobody knows who he is. He left this in the restroom after one of his visits. Raphael took the vial, examining it against the light. There was a dry residue on the inside walls, something that looked organic. I can't do anything based on this, he said, handing the vial back. But I will talk to the team about investigating parasites. If you're right, you could save this boy's life. And if I'm right about the man, Raphael sighed, then this becomes a police matter, and that's way beyond what I can do alone. But at least it's a start, Mariana thought. Finally, someone was listening. That night, Raphael presented the theory at a medical meeting. The reception was mixed. Dr. Sampson was skeptical, almost dismissive. He said they weren't going to waste time on absurd theories based on the feelings of a traumatized child. But some of the younger doctors seemed interested. And when Raphael mentioned that airway parasites wouldn't show up on conventional tests, which would explain why all the results had been inconclusive, there was a pause. It was decided they would perform a more invasive procedure, a bronchoscopy, something that would allow them to directly visualize Gabriel's airways. It would be risky given the boy's fragile state, but it was the only way to confirm or rule out the theory. Mariana found out from Raphael, who sought her out in the library the next day. We're doing the procedure tomorrow morning. If there's something there, we'll find it. And if you find it, then your theory was right, and then we'll have to act fast. She nodded, feeling a mix of relief and fear. Relief because they were finally investigating, fear of what they might find, and even more fear of what would happen if they found nothing. The night was long. Mariana could barely sleep. She tossed and turned, listening to Joanna's heavy breathing on the mattress beside her, thinking about her dad, about Gabriel, about everything that had led to this moment. She thought about what it would be like if she was wrong. If it was all a coincidence, trauma, her imagination, as everyone said. The humiliation would be unbearable, and worse, Gabriel would die without answers. But if she was right, if there really was something there, then it meant her father could have been saved too. If someone had listened, if someone had investigated, if she herself had pushed harder. The guilt was painful, but it also fueled her determination. The next morning, Mariana arrived at the hospital with Joanna. She was restless all morning, unable to concentrate on anything. She saw the activity on the 4th floor increase. She saw them take Gabriel to the operating room. She saw the Adler family in the hallway, elegant even in their anguish, waiting for news. Raphael appeared 2 hours later. His face said everything before he even opened his mouth. You were right. We found it. It's exactly what you said it was. Mariana felt her legs give way. Raphael steadied her, guiding her to a bench. How is that possible? She asked, her voice trembling. We don't know yet, but we're treating it, and he has a chance now because of you. The tears came, but this time they were different. They weren't tears of desperation or frustration, they were tears of validation, proof that she wasn't crazy, that her father hadn't died from negligence that could have been avoided if only someone had known, if only someone had looked harder. But the question remained. How had Gabriel been infected? And who was that man? The answer would come faster than anyone imagined, and it would be worse than Mariana could have ever predicted. The news spread through the hospital like wildfire. A child had diagnosed what an entire team of specialized doctors couldn't. Mariana suddenly found herself at the center of attention she didn't want. People who had never noticed her before now stopped to stare, some with admiration, others with suspicion, and Dr. Sampson with something that looked dangerously close to resentment. Gabriel was treated immediately. The procedure was delicate, almost surgical in its precision. Raphael explained to Mariana, in terms she could understand, that they had removed the parasite from the boy's airways. It was a rare organism, the kind normally only found in dense tropical forest regions. There was a treatment protocol, but it was obscure, relegated to chapters in old books that no one consulted anymore. "What puzzles me," Raphael said one afternoon, sitting next to Mariana in the library that had become their shared territory, "is how this parasite got to Gabriel. His family has never traveled to at-risk regions. The boy has never left New York except for beaches and resorts." That's when Mariana told him about the man, about the regular visits, always at the same time, about the smell she recognized, about the vial she had found. Raphael grew serious. "If what you're suggesting is true, this isn't a medical case anymore. It's criminal. Someone deliberately infected a child, and if they did it to Gabriel, they could have done it to other people. Like my dad." The words slipped out before she could stop them. Raphael looked at her with painful understanding. "It's possible. If your dad worked in maintenance, he had access to a lot of places. He could have been exposed naturally, but he also could have been a target. We need to investigate." "How?" "First, we need to identify this man. You said he wears a visitor's badge. Every visitor has to sign in at the front desk. I'll request access to the logs." But Raphael was a resident with no authority to conduct his own investigations. When he tried to request the records, he was blocked by the administration. They said it was confidential information, that he needed authorization from a superior. And when Dr. Sampson heard about the attempt, he called Raphael in for a private conversation that the entire team heard about. "You're letting a child influence your medical judgment," Sampson said, loud enough for others to hear. "This is unacceptable. If you want to continue at this hospital, I suggest you focus on your work and stop playing detective." Raphael returned, defeated. Mariana saw the frustration on his face and felt her own hope dwindle. "We can't give up," she said. "If that man did this to Gabriel, he'll do it to other kids. You said so yourself." "I know, but my hands are tied. And so are yours. We're just a kid and a doctor, with no credibility." It was Joanna who brought an unexpected solution. That night at home, while she was making a simple dinner of rice and eggs, she mentioned casually that Debbie, from the front desk, owed her a favor. Mariana had helped Debbie's daughter with her math homework a few weeks earlier, and the woman had been very grateful. "Maybe she can help," Joanna said, not fully understanding what she was suggesting. Mariana's heart sped up. It was risky to involve her mother, but it might be the only way. The next day, with Joanna's reluctant help and Debbie's complicity, they got access to the visitor logs from the past few weeks. There were hundreds of names. But when they filtered for Gabriel Adler's visitors, the list shrank to 15 people. And when Mariana described the man she had seen, Debbie frowned. "There's only one person who fits that description. He always comes in sunglasses and doesn't stay long. The name on the log is Robert Miller. But the weird thing is, he uses a different address for every visit, like he's moving every week." Raphael managed to get a photo from the visitor badge system. When he showed it to Mariana, she confirmed it instantly. It was him, the man with the smell of rust. "Now we need to find out who he really is," Raphael said. It was Dr. Mitchell, one of the older doctors on the team, who ended up providing the crucial clue. He overheard their conversation by chance, passing by the library as Raphael and Mariana discussed the case. He stopped, listened for a few seconds, and then walked in. "Are you talking about Robert Miller?" "I know that name. He worked with the Adler family about 10 years ago. He was a minority partner in the pharmacy chain. There was an ugly lawsuit when he was forced out. He lost everything." The information changed everything. Suddenly, it wasn't a random mystery. It was revenge. It was personal. Raphael took their findings to the hospital board, but this time with more solid evidence. The story of Robert Miller, the suspicious visits, the vial, Mariana's correct diagnosis of a rare parasite that no one else had considered. Along with Dr. Mitchell, who was well respected in the institution, they finally got their attention. The police were called, discreetly so as not to alarm the suspect. They set up surveillance in the hallways. They waited. Robert showed up 3 days later. It was a Friday afternoon, the grey sky threatening rain. Mariana was in the library when she heard the commotion. She ran to the hallway just in time to see the man being approached by security guards near the ICU entrance. He tried to run. He shoved one of the guards, knocked over a medicine cart and bolted for the stairs. But he didn't get far. He was restrained on the second floor, still struggling, shouting that it was all a misunderstanding. They took him into custody, and when the police searched his belongings, they found something that made even the most seasoned investigators' skin crawl. A small thermal container, the kind used to transport biological materials. Inside, preserved in a solution, were 3 live parasites, identical to the one they had removed from Gabriel. During the interrogation, Robert confessed, but not with remorse, with bitterness. He said that Edward Adler, Gabriel's father, had stolen his company, his ideas, his life. He said he needed to make Edward feel pain, the same pain he felt when he lost everything. He didn't want to kill Gabriel quickly. He wanted Edward to watch his son waste away, to spend a fortune trying to save him, to feel the absolute powerlessness of not being able to protect the one he loved most. But he hadn't stopped at Gabriel. There was a list. 6 names. 6 children from families Robert held responsible for his downfall. 3 had already been infected before Gabriel. One of them had recovered by sheer luck, the doctors attributing the improvement to broad-spectrum antibiotics that happened to fight the parasitic infection. Another was undergoing treatment in another state with no conclusive diagnosis, and the 3rd hadn't survived. When they discovered this, when the full magnitude of what Robert had done was revealed, the silence in the hospital was deafening. Mariana heard it all through Raphael, who turned pale as he received the information from the police. "And my dad?" she asked, her voice small. Raphael took a deep breath. "Your dad wasn't on the list. The police believe it was natural exposure. He worked in regions where these parasites exist. It was bad luck, Mari, terrible luck, but it wasn't intentional. It should have been a relief, but it wasn't. Because if it wasn't intentional, it was negligence, it was incompetence. It was the medical system failing to diagnose something that was there, that could have been treated if someone had looked harder, if someone had believed Michael's complaints, if someone had paid attention to the symptoms." Mariana cried that night. She cried for everything that could have been different. She cried for the father she couldn't save. She cried for Gabriel, whom she had managed to help. She cried for the injustice of a system that ignores the invisible until it's too late. But along with the tears, something else was growing. A determination, a purpose. Gabriel recovered. It took weeks, but he finally started breathing normally again. The color returned to his skin. The light came back to his eyes. The Adler family, grateful in a way that transcended words, wanted to reward Mariana. They offered money. She refused. They offered a scholarship. She accepted, but with one condition. "I want to study medicine, and I want to make sure other cases like my dad's aren't ignored. I want people to listen, especially when the person speaking doesn't have a voice." Edward Adler looked at this small girl, with her undone braids and eyes too determined for her age, and saw something that touched him deeply. He promised more than a scholarship. He promised support. He promised change. But before anything could be set in motion, one last development shook everything once again. Robert hadn't acted alone. The revelation came from the deepening police investigation. There was an accomplice, someone from inside the hospital, who facilitated Robert's access, who diverted attention at the right moments, who made sure no one asked the right questions. Someone with enough medical knowledge to know exactly how these parasites worked and how to keep them undetectable. The name, when it was revealed, shocked everyone. Dr. Henry Sampson, the head of the medical team, the man who had discredited Mariana from the beginning, the one who threatened Joanna's job, the one who blocked every attempt at investigation. He hadn't done it for money, he'd done it for a bruised ego. Years ago, Edward Adler had published a study discrediting a piece of Sampson's research, destroying his academic reputation. The resentment festered, and when Robert approached him, offering a way to get revenge. Samson accepted. His arrest was discreet, almost silent, but the shockwaves it sent through the hospital were seismic. Trust was broken. Reputations were destroyed. Unanswered questions lingered about how many other cases he might have sabotaged over the years. And Mariana, in the middle of it all, tried to process that the man who had tried the hardest to silence her was the one who most needed her to stay quiet. The trauma would be lasting, but it would also be transformative. Because now she knew that small voices could change destinies, that the truth, no matter how deeply buried, eventually comes to light, and that sometimes children see what adults refuse to. 6 months had passed since the day that changed everything. Queen's General Hospital was never the same. Neither was Mariana, nor was anyone who witnessed the unfolding of a story that seemed torn from a nightmare but was too real to be ignored. The changes started subtly. First was the visitor protocol, which became much stricter. Then came the team meetings where doctors were encouraged to consider unlikely diagnoses. Training on active listening was implemented, and most importantly, a direct line was created so that any employee, regardless of their position, could report medical concerns without fear of retaliation. But the real transformation was happening elsewhere. Edward Adler was not a man of half measures. When he promised change, he meant structural, profound, lasting change. With his own resources and partnerships with medical institutions, he created the Michael Miller Institute, named in honor of Mariana's father. The mission was clear: to study, catalogue, and train professionals on neglected diseases, rare parasites, and medical conditions that fell through the cracks of the healthcare system. Raphael was invited to be one of the medical coordinators. He accepted without hesitation. Dr. Mitchell, who had provided the crucial clue about Robert Miller, became a senior consultant, and Mariana, though still just a child, was named a symbolic consultant. Her official role was inspirational, but in practice, she participated in meetings, offered perspectives, and reminded everyone why their work mattered. Joanna couldn't believe it at first. When the first check for Mariana's scholarship arrived, she held the paper with trembling hands, reading and rereading the numbers as if they might disappear. It was more than she earned in 6 months of work. And that wasn't all. There was full coverage for education, school supplies, uniforms, meals, even psychological support. "My love," Joanna said that night, holding her daughter tight. "You saved that boy, and somehow you saved us too." Mariana rested her head on her mother's shoulder. The smell of cheap laundry detergent and exhaustion was still there, but now there was something new: hope, possibility, a future. But it wasn't all roses. The healing process is never linear. Mariana still had nightmares about her father. She would wake up sweating, thinking she heard his cough echoing through the hallways of their small apartment. Guilt would visit her at random moments, whispering that if she had been more insistent, more convincing, maybe Michael would still be here. The Institute's psychologist, Dr. Cecilia Vance, a woman with a soft voice and infinite patience, worked with Mariana twice a week. She explained that guilt was part of grief, but it wasn't the truth, that she had done what a 9-year-old child could do, that it wasn't her responsibility to save her father, that it was okay to be angry at the system that failed, that it was okay to cry. And Mariana cried. She cried a lot. But between the tears, she also began to rebuild. Her school changed. With the scholarship came a transfer to a private institution, one of the best in the area. It was hard at first. The other kids came from families with money, with new cars and designer clothes. Mariana still wore the same worn-out uniform, still brought her lunch in a repurposed yogurt container, still had a patched-up backpack. But she had something none of them had. She had a story. She had a purpose. She had lived through things that change your perspective. Some classmates treated her with morbid curiosity, others with genuine respect, but she wasn't there to make friends. She was there to learn, to prepare, to honor her father's memory by becoming the doctor he would have been proud to see. Gabriel went back to school too. He and Mariana developed an unlikely friendship. He, the rich boy who almost lost everything. She, the poor girl who lost everything but found something new. They talked about deep things, about second chances, about gratitude and guilt and responsibility. Gabriel had changed. The near-death experience had matured him in ways his parents were still processing. He no longer wanted to follow the automatic path of taking over the family business. He wanted to go into medicine too. He wanted to help. He wanted to give back. Visits to Michael's grave became a ritual. Every Sunday, Mariana and Joanna would go to the small cemetery on the outskirts of the city, bring cheap flowers from the market and just stand there talking to him. Mariana would tell him about school, about the institute, about the progress in rare parasite research. She told him how his stethoscope was now being used in training sessions, how every new doctor at the institute sat through a lecture on the story of Michael Miller, the maintenance tech whose symptoms were ignored until it was too late. "You became a symbol, Dad," she would say, her voice thick with emotion. "You became a reminder that every patient deserves to be heard, every complaint deserves attention, every life matters no matter where it comes from." The tears would fall, but now they were accompanied by something else: acceptance, transformation. The pain didn't disappear, but it gained meaning. A year later, the institute organized a symposium. Doctors from all over the country came to learn about neglected diseases, about how to listen to marginalized patients, about how healthcare systems fail the most vulnerable. Mariana was invited to speak. She walked onto the stage, having just turned 10, wearing a simple but dignified outfit that Joanna had bought especially for the occasion. The auditorium was packed, hundreds of faces waiting. She held the microphone, took a deep breath and began. "My name is Mariana Miller. My dad's name was Michael. He was a maintenance tech, and he was the most important person in my life." She told the whole story, unfiltered, unsoftened. She talked about the hospital visits, the dismissed complaints, the symptoms treated as exaggeration. She talked about watching her father waste away, about feeling helpless, about not being heard because she was a child. She talked about Gabriel, about recognizing the symptoms, about fighting to convince someone to investigate. She talked about Robert Miller and Dr. Sampson, about revenge and bruised egos, about how adults sometimes choose pride over truth. And then she talked about change. My dad couldn't be saved, but Gabriel was. And so were other children on Robert's list. And how many more will be in the future, because of the changes that have happened here, because of the new protocols, the training, the institute that bears my father's name. She looked out at the audience, saw tears on many faces, saw experienced doctors looking at their own hands as if seeing them for the first time. "I'm not a doctor. Not yet. But one day I will be. And I will remember all of this. I'll remember that diagnoses don't just come from books and tests. They come from listening, from truly listening, from believing people when they say something is wrong, even if the tests say otherwise, from not dismissing someone just because they're poor or young, or because they don't have the right words to explain their pain." The standing ovation was deafening. Mariana walked off the stage, trembling, falling into the arms of Joanna, who was crying with pride, felt Raphael squeeze her shoulder with fatherly affection, saw Gabriel smiling from the front row. Later, at the small reception they organized, Edward Adler approached her. There was something different in his eyes now. It was no longer gratitude or pity. It was respect. "You know you've changed a lot of things, don't you? Not just here. Hospitals in other states are adopting our protocols. Medical schools are adding classes on active listening to their curriculum. Your father, your story, it's all become a benchmark." Mariana shook her head. "I just wish he was here to see it." "I know, but he sees it through you. Everything you're going to do, everything you've already done is a continuation of him." The following years brought more changes. Mariana grew, matured, but never lost the fierce determination that was born in that hospital hallway. She studied with an obsessive intensity. She was always at the top of her class in biology, in science, in everything related to health. Her teachers knew her as the girl with a purpose, her classmates as the one who never gave up. Gabriel remained her friend. They studied together, dreamed together, planned a future where they would both be doctors, where they would work at the institute, where they would continue the legacy that began in such a painful way. Joanna finally allowed herself to dream too. She went back to school, got her GED, and secured a better position at the hospital as an administrative assistant. She was no longer invisible. Now people knew her name, respected her story, recognized the strength it took to hold everything together alone after Michael was gone. The stethoscope stayed with Mariana. It was now kept in a special box, along with photos of her dad, letters he had written to her when she was a baby, small treasures from a life that ended too soon but left indelible marks. She didn't use it anymore. It was a relic, a memory, a symbol. One day when she graduated from medical school, she planned to donate it to the Institute to be put on permanent display with the full story. 5 years after that November that changed everything, on Mariana's 15th birthday, the Institute held a ceremony. It wasn't a party, it was a recognition. They created a permanent scholarship in Michael Miller's name, designated for the children of hospital staff, kids from underserved communities, young people who dreamed of medicine but lacked the resources. The first recipient was a 13-year-old girl, the daughter of a cook, who had the same determined eyes Mariana had at 9. Mariana met the girl, talked with her, saw in her a reflection of her own past, and she realized the circle was complete. The pain had been transformed into a legacy. The loss had generated change. The silence had given way to a voice. That night, alone in the room she no longer had to share with her mother, Mariana wrote a letter to her father. It was something the psychologist had suggested years ago, and she finally felt ready. "Dad," she wrote, "you're not here to see what happened. You're not here to see the Institute with your name on it, the lives saved, the changes your story caused. But I know you know. I know that somehow, you see, and I hope you're proud. Not just of what I did, but of who you were. Because it all starts with you. Your kindness, your hard work, your fight even when no one was listening. You taught me not to give up, to believe that the truth matters, to fight for the invisible. Because you were one of them. I love you, and I will spend my whole life honoring your memory, saving people the way you should have been saved, I promise." She folded the letter and placed it with the stethoscope, and for the first time in years, she slept without nightmares. Queen's General Hospital still stood, its walls witnesses to tragedies and miracles. The hallways where Mariana had spent so many afternoons still echoed with hurried footsteps, distant alarms, urgent conversations. But now there was something different in the air. An awareness, a renewed sense of care. A constant reminder that every patient has a story, every symptom deserves attention, every voice needs to be heard. And somewhere, between those floors on a discreet but visible plaque, were simple letters. The Michael Miller Institute. In memory of those who were silenced, in honor of those who refused to be quiet. Mariana still visited, not as the invisible girl from years ago, but as the young woman who represented hope, change, proof that systems can be transformed, that small voices can echo louder than any diploma or title. Joanna sometimes accompanied her, walking through the same hallways she had cleaned for years, but now with her head held high with a reclaimed dignity, with the certainty that the pain they endured had not been in vain. And Gabriel, always Gabriel, would show up to talk, to study, to remember that the two of them shared something unique, a second chance, a life debt, a common purpose. The future was still uncertain. Mariana had years of study ahead of her, immense challenges, moments when she would doubt, when she would grow tired, when she would question if she was strong enough. But she would always return to that hallway, to that afternoon, to that moment when a 9-year-old girl decided she would be heard, that she would make a difference, that she would turn tragedy into a legacy. And that is exactly what she did. The sun set over New York, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, the same colors as that evening where it all began. Mariana stood at her bedroom window, looking out at the immense city, full of invisible stories, silent pains, voices waiting to be heard. "I'll listen," she whispered to the night. "I'll listen to all of you." And the wind, somehow, seemed to answer with approval. 3 years had passed since the symposium. Mariana was now 13 and had discovered that growing up hurts in ways no one prepares you for. She was no longer the little girl with undone braids that everyone treated with a mix of pity and admiration. She was a teenager, trying to find a balance between being a symbol of hope and just being human. The private school continued to be a daily challenge. Her grades were excellent, they always had been, but friendships were a minefield. There were those who genuinely respected her. There were those who feigned closeness to feel special for knowing the girl from the famous story. And there were those who hated her for reasons she could never fully understand. Jealousy, perhaps, or just the natural cruelty that teenagers sometimes cultivate. It was on a March afternoon, when the suffocating New York heat made the classrooms almost unbearable, that everything started to crack again. Mariana was at recess, sitting alone under a tree in the courtyard, rereading her biology notes, when she heard the voices. 3 girls from her class, from the group that always seemed to have a problem with her, were talking just loud enough for her to hear. She thinks she's better than everyone just because her dad died in some dramatic way, one of them said, her voice dripping with disdain. And now she plays the victim, poor little thing, using the story to get everything handed to her, another added. I bet it wasn't even that serious. She probably exaggerated the whole thing to get a scholarship and be on the news. Mariana felt her blood run cold. She wanted to stand up, to scream, to defend her father's memory, to defend her own truth. But she was frozen. The words hurt more than any physical slap ever could, because they touched on insecurities she kept, hidden deep inside. What if people really thought that? What if they thought she was exploiting the tragedy? What if her dad would be disappointed in what she had become? She came home that day with her eyes swollen from holding back tears. Joanna noticed immediately, but Mariana said it was just a headache. She locked herself in her room, hugged the case where she kept her father's stethoscope, and finally allowed the tears to fall. Why does it have to be so hard, Dad? She whispered to the lifeless object that represented all that was left of Michael. I just want to honor you. I just want to make a difference, but people make it seem like I'm wrong, like I am wrong. The silence in the room was deafening. There were no answers. There never were. It was Raphael who noticed the change in her. At the Institute's meetings, Mariana was quieter, more withdrawn. She participated when asked, but she no longer offered spontaneous ideas like before. The light in her eyes had dimmed a little. He sought her out after a particularly tense meeting about new cases of neglected diseases. He took her for ice cream at a small shop near the Institute, a simple place they sometimes went when they needed to talk away from institutional eyes. "What's going on, Mari?" he asked, as direct as he always was with her. Mariana stirred her melting chocolate ice cream, unable to look at Raphael. "The girls at school said I make things up, that I exaggerate my dad's story to get ahead, that I'm a fake." Raphael sighed deeply. "And you believe them?" "I don't know. Sometimes I wonder if I really deserved all this. The scholarship, the institute with my dad's name, the attention, I good enough? Or do people just feel sorry for me? Mari, look at me." She finally lifted her eyes. Raphael had that serious but caring expression he always used when he needed to say important truths. "You saved Gabriel's life. You identified a pattern that trained doctors missed. You fought when everyone ignored you. You turned the worst experience of your life into something that is saving other people. None of that is an invention. None of that is an exaggeration. And anyone who says otherwise is either jealous or simply doesn't understand what you've been through." "But what? If I'm using his memory the wrong way, what if Dad would be disappointed?" "Your dad would be proud, immensely proud, and you know why? Because you chose to turn pain into purpose. That's the hardest thing anyone can do." His words calmed the storm inside her a little, but the wound was still open. Things got worse when an article was published in a tabloid questioning the veracity of Mariana's story. The journalist, a bitter man with a history of controversial pieces, insinuated that the family had fabricated or exaggerated events to gain benefits. He quoted anonymous sources, asked leading questions and planted doubts without presenting any concrete evidence. The Institute responded officially with documents, medical reports, and statements from the professionals involved. But the damage was done. On social media, where Mariana didn't have a profile but her classmates did, vicious comments began to circulate. Absurd conspiracy theories gained traction, and she was at the center of it all, feeling brutally exposed. It was Gabriel who brought light to that dark moment. Now 16 and matured far beyond his years, he asked his parents for permission to make a video. Simple, honest, direct. He posted it on the Adler family's social media accounts, which had millions of followers. "My name is Gabriel Adler. 4 years ago I was dying. The best doctors in the country couldn't figure out what was wrong with me. And it was a 9-year-old girl, the daughter of a hospital employee, who identified the problem and saved my life. It wasn't luck. It wasn't an invention. It was knowledge, courage, and compassion. Anyone who questions Mariana Miller's story is questioning my own life. And I am here, alive, as living proof that every word of it is true." The video went viral. Millions of views in days. Comments of support flooded in. The journalist who wrote the article was discredited, and Mariana, for the first time in weeks, could breathe a little easier. But the experience left its mark. She became more cautious, more private, more protective of her own story. She stopped talking about her father with strangers. She stopped accepting invitations to speak at events. She just wanted to study, to live, to be normal. It was at this moment that a new twist emerged. A woman contacted the Institute with a story that made Mariana's blood run cold. Her husband had passed away 5 years ago with symptoms similar to Michael's. Same profession, hospital maintenance tech, same dismissed complaints, same progression of symptoms, same lack of a conclusive diagnosis. The woman brought documents, medical reports, photos. Everything indicated that this was not an isolated case. Michael and this other man, named Paul, had worked together for years. They visited the same sites, and they had both developed the same rare condition. Raphael called an emergency meeting. The Institute's team analyzed the documents, and the conclusion was devastating. There was a pattern of systemic negligence. Hospital maintenance workers, especially those who worked in rural areas, were being exposed to hazardous environments without adequate protection or proper medical follow-up. When they got sick, their complaints were dismissed as exaggeration or hypochondria. It was class prejudice disguised as medical judgment. Mariana felt anger, a deep, visceral anger she hadn't felt in years. It wasn't just about her dad. It was about Paul. It was about how many others had been ignored, how many families destroyed, how many children lost their fathers because the system decided those lives didn't warrant proper attention. She decided she needed to do more. The Institute was doing important work, but it was reactive. It waited for cases to come to them. It needed to be proactive. It needed to go to these workers, investigate their working conditions, create safety protocols, and train occupational health professionals. Edward Adler approved the project's expansion. With additional funding, they created a specific program for the health of hospital workers. Mariana, though only 13, actively participated in the planning meetings. Her perspective was unique. She understood the invisibility of these workers because she had lived it. Joanna was invited to work in the program too. Her experience as a cleaning staff member was invaluable. She knew the challenges, the prejudices, the difficulties. She hesitated at first, feeling inadequate, but Mariana encouraged her. "Mum, no one understands this better than you. No one can speak with the authority you have. Please, do it for Dad. Do it for all the other people like him." Joanna accepted, and she discovered she had a natural talent for community organizing. She began visiting hospitals, talking to cleaning, maintenance, and kitchen staff. She collected stories, identified problems, and mapped out risks. It was grassroots work, essential, transformative. Slowly, mother and daughter became a team. Joanna in the field, collecting data. Mariana in the office analyzing patterns, suggesting solutions. Raphael coordinating the medical side. Gabriel helping with logistics and outreach. It was a growing movement, gaining strength. But it wasn't all work. Mariana needed to live, too. And it was during this period that she met Lucas. He was new at school, having just moved from Ohio with his family. He was shy, kind, and knew nothing about her story. And for that very reason, She felt at ease with him. They started as group partners on a science project, then they became friends. Lucas loved astronomy, spending hours talking about stars and constellations. Mariana listened, fascinated, grateful to talk about something that wasn't disease, tragedy, or social responsibility. It was just a teenager talking to another teenager about the infinite universe. He found out about her story eventually, of course. Everyone at school knew, but it didn't change the way he treated her. He was still just Lucas, and that was precious. One night, during the school's science fair, they were on the roof setting up a telescope. The sky was surprisingly clear for New York. Lucas pointed to the constellation Orion, explaining the stars that formed it. "So you know what I find fascinating?" he said. "The light from those stars traveled light years to get here. Some of them might have even burned out by now, but their light is still traveling. It's still reaching us." Mariana looked up at the sky, thoughtful. "It's like people," she said softly. "My dad isn't here anymore, but his impact continues. It keeps reaching places he never imagined." Lucas looked at her with something in his eyes she couldn't quite identify. Respect, maybe. Or admiration. Or something more. "You're amazing, Mari. I hope you know that." She felt her face grow, warm. She wasn't used to compliments that weren't about strength or overcoming adversity. This was different. It was personal. "Thanks for not treating me like a symbol," she said, "for just letting me be myself. You are yourself, and that's more than enough." It was a small, delicate moment, but it meant so much. Because Mariana realized she could be both. She could carry her father's legacy and still be a teenager. She could fight for important causes and still look at the stars. She could honor the past and still build her own future. The following weeks brought important news in the occupational health program. They managed to get a city ordinance passed, requiring hospitals to provide adequate protective equipment for all employees, regardless of their position. They created a protocol for regular medical checkups for workers exposed to biological risks. And most importantly, they established an anonymous reporting channel for cases of negligence. The official launch ceremony for the program was emotional. Dozens of hospital workers were present, men and women who cleaned, cooked, repaired, and maintained the infrastructure that allowed hospitals to function. Invisible to most, but essential. Joanna spoke that day. For the first time in public, she shared her own story. She talked about Michael, about the hardships, about how he was treated by doctors when he asked for help. She talked about losing her husband, about raising a daughter alone, about turning pain into a fight. Her voice trembled, but it didn't break, and when she finished, the ovation was deafening. Mariana watched from the front row, tears streaming freely down her face. She saw her mother, who had always been so strong, yet so silent, finally using her own voice, and she felt an immense pride. After the ceremony, as people mingled over coffee, an elderly woman approached Mariana. She had grey hair pulled back in a tight bun and calloused hands from a lifetime of work. "You don't know me," the woman said, "but I knew your father. We worked together for 2 years at a clinic upstate. He was a good man, always talked about you with so much pride." Mariana felt her heart clench. "Really? He talked about me?" "All the time. He said you were going to be someone important, that you were going to make a difference in the world. He believed in you so much." The tears returned. The woman held her hands gently. "And he was right. Look at what you've done. Look at how many lives you've already touched. Your father is watching, child. Wherever he is, he's watching and he's proud." Mariana hugged the woman, finally letting it all out. They were tears of pain, of longing, but also of healing, because hearing that her father believed in her, that he spoke of her with pride, that he had hopes for her future, that meant she wasn't disappointing anyone. She was honoring exactly what he had always wanted. That night at home, Mariana opened the case where she kept the stethoscope. She picked up the object carefully, feeling its familiar weight. And for the first time in a long time, she put it in her ears. Not to listen to anything specific, just to feel the connection, to remember that stories don't end when people leave. They continue, like the light from dead stars, traveling, arriving, illuminating, 5 years later. Mariana was 18, and in her last week of high school. The MCATs were just a few months away. The nights were long, filled with stacks of prep books, colorful notes, and endless practice questions. But she didn't complain. Every formula memorized, every concept absorbed, was another step closer to the dream she had nurtured since she was 9 years old. Lucas was still by her side. They had become best friends over the years, the kind of friendship that transcends labels. He was going to study engineering, but they shared late-night study sessions, encouraging each other when exhaustion threatened to win. Gabriel was also preparing for medical school. They had made a pact years ago to get in together, to graduate together, to work together at the institute. It was a shared goal that kept them motivated even on the toughest days. It was during one of these study afternoons in the institute's library that Raphael appeared with an unusual expression. There was an urgency in his eyes, but also something Mariana couldn't quite place. "Mari, I need to show you something. It's about your dad." Her heart leaped. After all these years, any mention of Michael still had the power to destabilize her. Raphael led her to his office, closed the door, and placed a manila envelope on the desk. "We were organizing old hospital archives, digitizing historical documents, and we found this." Inside the envelope was a medical chart, Michael Miller's, but it wasn't the one she knew. These were earlier pages, from months before he got really sick, from visits she never even knew had happened. "He sought help much earlier than you knew," Raphael explained. "Look at the dates, 6 appointments over the course of a year." He described his symptoms with precision. He even drew what he felt in his throat. And look at what the doctors wrote. Mariana read the notes with growing horror. Anxiety, hypochondria, suggestion for psychiatric follow-up. Advised not to seek unnecessary medical attention. Not once was there a proper investigation. Not once a specific test. Not once was he taken seriously. "He tried," she whispered, her voice breaking. "He tried so hard, and no one listened." The tears came, hot and angry. Raphael waited in respectful silence as she processed it. After minutes that felt like hours, Mariana wiped her face and looked at him with renewed determination. "This proves everything. It proves he didn't wait too long. It proves it wasn't his fault. It proves the system failed him completely." "Exactly, and I think you need to see one more thing." Raphael opened his laptop and showed her a spreadsheet. It was a list of similar cases, tracked by the Institute's team over the past few years. 23 names, 23 healthcare workers who had presented similar symptoms and been neglected. 12 had died. 11 had survived after delayed intervention. And they all had one thing in common. They were low-level employees. Invisible. "This is an epidemic," Mariana said. "It's not an accident. It's a pattern." "That's what we're trying to prove. But we need more evidence, more documented cases. And we need someone who understands both the medical side and the human side. Someone who lived it." He looked at her meaningfully. Mariana understood. "You want me to lead the investigation. You're the only one who can. You have the credibility, the knowledge, the personal motivation, and most importantly, you have the empathy. You know what these families are feeling because you felt it too." Mariana took a deep breath. It was an immense responsibility, but it was also an opportunity to finally understand completely what happened to her father, and to stop it from happening to others. "I'll do it, but I need time. I need to get into college first." Of course, this can wait a few months, but I wanted you to know. I wanted you to see that your father's work, his memory, continues to create change. That night, Mariana couldn't study. She just stared at the pages of her father's medical chart, reading and rereading every word, every note, every piece of evidence that he had tried to save himself, but no one would listen. The anger was immense, but there was something else too. Validation. Proof that it hadn't been her imagination, it hadn't been an exaggeration, it had been nothing but systemic negligence. Joanna found her, daughter like that, late at night, surrounded by papers, her eyes red but her expression determined. "Are you okay, honey?" Mariana showed the documents to her mother. Joanna read them in silence, her hands trembling slightly as she turned each page. When she finished, she was quiet for a long time. "I didn't know," she finally said. "I didn't know he had gone so many times. He didn't tell me, so I wouldn't worry. He tried to save himself, Mom. He tried so hard. It wasn't his fault." Joanna nodded, wiping away tears that were silently streaming down her face. "And it wasn't our fault either. It was the system. It was people who decided his life didn't matter enough." They hugged, sharing a renewed pain, but also a renewed strength. Because now they knew the whole truth. And the truth, however painful, is always better than doubt. The next few months were a whirlwind. College applications, exams, anxiety, anticipation. Mariana studied with an almost obsessive intensity. So did Gabriel. Lucas kept them company in the early hours, providing coffee and encouragement, even as he studied for a completely different field. When the acceptance letters came out, Mariana was at home with Joanna. They checked the portal together, hands clasped, breath held, and there it was. Mariana Miller, accepted. Pre-med, New York University. The scream was one of pure joy. Joanna hugged her daughter with a force that seemed to want to merge them into one. They laughed and cried at the same time, relieved, proud, grateful. Gabriel called minutes later. He had gotten in too. Also to NYU. The pact was kept. There was a party at the Institute. Small, intimate, just the most important people. Raphael made an emotional toast. Edward Adler congratulated her with paternal pride. Lucas brought a cake he had baked himself, a little lopsided but delicious. And Joanna, simply Joanna, couldn't stop looking at her daughter with an expression that said everything without needing words. But the most important moment came later, after everyone had gone home. Mariana went to the display case where her father's stethoscope was on permanent exhibit. There was a small plaque explaining the story, photos of Michael, newspaper clippings. It was a small but meaningful memorial. "I did it, Dad," she whispered to the glass. "I'm going to be a doctor. I'm going to help people like you. I'm going to make sure no one is ever ignored like you were." She felt a hand on her shoulder. It was Raphael. "He's proud. I'm absolutely sure of it." "How can you be sure?" "He's not here." "Because I am. And if I, who barely knew your father, feel an immense pride in you, imagine what he would feel. You transformed the worst experience of your life into the strength to change the world. That's extraordinary." Mariana rested her head on Raphael's shoulder, finally letting it all out. They were tears of relief, of accomplishment, of a cycle closing. The start of college was everything she had hoped for and more. The classes were intense, challenging, fascinating. Anatomy, physiology, biochemistry, it all fit together like pieces of a puzzle revealing a larger picture. And always, she thought about how each piece of knowledge she acquired could have saved her father if applied at the right time. Gabriel was in the same program. They became an inseparable study duo. Other classmates sometimes commented on their story, on how they had gotten there. But over time they stopped being the girl who saved the rich boy and the rich boy who almost died. They became simply Mariana and Gabriel, dedicated, competent, human pre-med students. It was in her sophomore year that Mariana finally began the investigation into the pattern of negligence with healthcare workers. Under Raphael's guidance and with the Institute's support, she designed a structured research project. She visited hospitals, talked with employees, analyzed medical records, and collected data. What she discovered was systemic and devastating. There was a class bias deeply ingrained in American medicine. Poor patients, especially blue-collar workers, were consistently undertreated, their complaints minimized, their symptoms attributed to psychological causes without proper investigation. It wasn't a conspiracy. It was a prejudice so normalized that no one even noticed it anymore. Mariana presented her findings at a national medical conference. The lecture was powerful. Experienced doctors left feeling uncomfortable, recognizing patterns in their own practices. Students left determined to do things differently. And the media picked up the story, spreading it nationally. changes began to happen. Medical schools included modules on class bias in their curriculum. Hospitals revised their triage protocols. Medical boards issued guidelines on active listening and proper investigation regardless of a patient's socioeconomic status. It wasn't a complete revolution. A system doesn't change overnight. But it was a start. And Mariana knew that beginnings matter. Lucas graduated with his engineering degree the same year Mariana finished her 4th year of medical school. He got a job at a large firm, but surprised everyone by requesting to work in their hospital infrastructure division. He wanted to apply his engineering knowledge to improve working conditions for employees, create safer environments, and implement protective technologies. It was, in a way, a continuation of the work Michael used to do. Mariana and Lucas finally admitted what everyone had known for years. They were more than friends. There was no dramatic proposal or cinematic moment. Just a recognition of a connection that had existed for so long, it was impossible to say when friendship had turned into love. Their families reacted with joy. Joanna had adored Lucas from day one, and his family had learned to love Mariana too with all her intensity and purpose. It was on a Sunday in June, 4 years after starting medical school, that Mariana received news that would change everything again. She was doing a rotation at Queen's General, the same place where it all began when Raphael called her in for an urgent conversation. "Dr. Mitchell is retiring," he said, "and he left a specific recommendation. He wants you to take over as the coordinator of the new integrative medicine department we're creating. A department focused on neglected patients, complex cases, rare diseases, everything you fought for years." Mariana was speechless. It was a dream opportunity, but it also meant postponing or perhaps abandoning her plans for a traditional residency and specialization. "I know it's a tough decision," Raphael continued. "You don't have to answer now, but think about it. You were born for this." She walked the hospital corridors late that afternoon. She passed the medical library where she had spent so many hours studying rare parasites. She passed the 4th floor where she had first heard about Gabriel. She passed the side garden where she had cried after being thrown out of the ICU. Everything had started here. The pain, the fight, the transformation. She went up to the roof, a place she had discovered years ago that had become her secret refuge. The sun was setting over New York, painting the city in gold and pink. From up there she could see millions of lives happening simultaneously, each person, with their own stories, their own pains, their own hopes. She felt a presence beside her. It was Joanna. She had followed her up. "Thinking about Raphael's offer?" "I am. I don't know if I'm ready, Mom. I'm only 22. How am I supposed to run an entire department?" Joanna smiled, that wise smile only mothers have. "You were ready at 9 when you figured out what was killing Gabriel. You were ready at 13 when you led a research project on negligence. You're ready now. And if you're not completely ready, you'll learn that's what you've always done." "But what if I fail? What if I disappoint everyone who believes in me?" "Then you get up and try again, like you always have. Mari, your father didn't raise you to be perfect. He raised you to be persistent, to fight, to never give up. And that's exactly who you are." Mariana hugged her mother, finally feeling the answer in her heart. She knew what to do. The next day, she accepted the position, on the condition that Gabriel would be her deputy coordinator, that Lucas would be consulted on all decisions involving infrastructure, and that one of their first projects would be to expand Michael Miller's memorial to include the stories of all the workers who had been neglected. Raphael agreed to everything. And so, a new chapter began. The department opened 6 months later with an emotional ceremony. There was a gallery of photos in the entrance hallway. Michael was there, smiling in that picture Joanna cherished. Paul was there too, and 20 other workers whose stories had been rescued, honored, and immortalized. Patients began to arrive. Cases that other doctors had given up on, rare diseases no one wanted to investigate, poor people whose complaints had been ignored. And there in that department they were heard, truly heard. Mariana discovered she had a natural talent for it. She combined technical knowledge with deep empathy. She didn't just see symptoms, she saw people, she saw stories, she saw dignity. Gabriel was the perfect deputy. He complemented her where she was lacking. Together they were a formidable team. Lucas implemented an occupational exposure tracking system that became a national benchmark. Workers finally had adequate protection. And Joanna, wonderful Joanna, took over coordinating support for patients' families. She knew exactly what to say to those who were suffering. Because she had been there. Years passed. The department grew, cases were solved, lives were saved. The work never stopped. Mariana married Lucas in a small ceremony in the hospital garden. They used the rooftop for the reception. Gabriel was the best man. Joanna cried from beginning to end, but they were tears of pure happiness. And one night after a particularly difficult day where they had lost a patient despite their best efforts, Mariana returned to the memorial alone. She stood before her father's photo, feeling the familiar weight of a longing that never completely disappears. "We can't save everyone, Dad, no matter how hard we try. And it hurts so much, but we save a lot of them. We've changed a lot of things, and I'm going to keep fighting every day, for you, for all the invisible ones, because now they are seen, now they are heard, and that makes a difference." She felt a hand on her shoulder. Lucas was there, he always was. He knows, and he's proud. "How are you so sure?" "Because I see you every day. I see the difference you make. If I feel that, just being human, imagine a father looking at his daughter who turned pain into purpose." They stood there holding each other, looking at the photo of a man who had left too soon, but left a legacy that continued to grow, touching lives, changing destinies. And in that silence, between a past that wouldn't return and a future yet to be written, Mariana finally understood. Michael didn't need to be physically present to be with her. He was in every patient she treated with dignity, in every protocol that ensured voices were heard, in every life saved because someone decided to investigate instead of ignore. He was in everything. The hospital slept around them, but the work never stopped. Tomorrow would bring new cases, new challenges, new opportunities to make a difference, and Mariana would be ready, as she always had been, as she always would be, because some fights never end. They just transform. And she had learned as a young girl that turning pain into purpose isn't a weakness. It's the most powerful way to honor those we love and have lost. The father's stethoscope rested in its display case, a symbol of all that was and all that would be. And the story continued, word by word, life by life, change by change. There was no end, only a continuation, and that was perfect. Hey everyone, we hope Mariana's complete journey, from 9 years old to becoming the doctor she always dreamed of being, has deeply touched your heart. This story teaches us that pain can be transformed into purpose, that small voices can echo loudly, and that honoring those we've lost means continuing to fight for what they believed in. If this story moved you, hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, and let us know in the comments which moment of this saga hit you the hardest. Every day we bring you intense stories like this one, celebrating human strength, the love that transcends absence, and the courage to never give up. We'll see you in the next episode.